The cowboy didn't look at the wealthy woman waiting for his proposal. He walked straight past her and stopped beside the dusty saddle-maker near the door. Crystal glasses clinked somewhere behind her just as Wade Coulter's hand closed around Eliza Brooks's wrist. Snowmelt dripped from her worn boots onto the polished floor while the entire mansion fell silent. Then he spoke 5 words that turned every head in the room. "That woman is already my wife. What would you have done standing in Eliza's place?" Subscribe and stay close for the rest of this story. The wind coming off the Wyoming hills smelled like snow. Eliza Brooks pulled her coat tighter as she stepped down from the freight wagon outside the Coulter estate. Red dust clung to the hem of her skirt and the toes of her worn brown boots. The leather saddle strapped across her shoulder felt heavier than it had that morning in Copper Creek. She stared up at the house. Iron lanterns glowed along the massive porch. Music drifted through the open windows. Violins, laughter, crystal glasses clinking together. Too many carriages lined the front drive for a normal delivery. A stable hand passed her, carrying crates of champagne. "Party tonight?" Eliza asked. The boy blinked at her. "You serious?" Before she could answer, he hurried off toward the barn. Eliza shifted the saddle higher against her shoulder and climbed the steps. Snow clouds rolled low over the mountains behind the ranch, turning the evening sky dark blue. She knocked once. A maid opened the door and immediately frowned. "Yes, I'm here for Mr. Coulter's saddle," Eliza said. "Came from the south stable. He wanted the stitching redone before the winter cattle drive." The maid hesitated. Voices and piano music spilled into the hallway behind her. "Well," the maid muttered, "you'd better be quick." Eliza stepped inside and instantly wished she hadn't. The entrance hall looked like something from another world. Chandeliers burned overhead. Women in silk dresses moved through the room with lazy smiles and diamond bracelets glittering at their wrists. Men in dark coats laughed beside trays of whiskey. Nobody looked dusty. Nobody looked tired. Nobody looked like they'd spent the afternoon sewing leather beside a cold stove while trying to stretch coffee grounds for another day. Conversations slowed as heads turned toward her. Eliza felt it immediately. The pause, the staring, the judgment. A blonde woman near the fireplace tilted her head slightly. "Well," she said loudly, "someone certainly wandered into the wrong celebration." Soft laughter followed. Eliza kept her chin up. "I'm just here to deliver something for Mr. Coulter." The blonde woman stepped closer. Her emerald dress swept across the polished floor like water. Clara Granger. Everybody in Wyoming knew her face. "I'm afraid Mr. Coulter is occupied," Clara said smoothly. "Tonight is a private gathering." Eliza adjusted the saddle on her shoulder. "Then I'll leave it with one of the stable boys." Clara's eyes moved slowly over Eliza's faded coat, the dust on her sleeves, the cracked leather gloves tucked into her belt. "How practical," she murmured. Another woman laughed into her wine glass. Eliza heard one whisper, "She repairs saddles?" Another answered, "Looks like she sleeps in the barn with them." Heat crept into Eliza's neck. She should leave, but something stubborn rooted her boots to the floor. "I finished the work early," she said evenly. "Thought Mr. Coulter might appreciate getting back what he paid for." That drew a few raised eyebrows. Clara smiled without warmth. "And what exactly did Wade pay for?" Eliza met her gaze. "Honest work." The room quieted just a little more. Clara's smile tightened. Then she waved casually toward a servant near the stairs. "Take the saddle," she said, "and show the girl out through the back entrance." The servant moved forward, awkwardly. Eliza handed over the saddle slowly. Her fingers were stiff from the cold. She turned toward the door. That was when a deep voice cut across the room. "She's not leaving." The sound stopped everything. Even the piano. People stepped aside near the staircase. Wade Coulter stood at the top landing, with one hand resting against the banister. Tall, broad shoulders. Black coat fitted close against him. Dark hair slightly windswept like he'd just come in from outside. He looked less like a ranch owner and more like the kind of man storms listened to. His eyes all settled on Eliza. Not curious, not surprised, steady. He descended the stairs slowly while the room held its breath. Clara's expression softened instantly. Wade, darling, we were just... I heard you. His voice stayed calm, but it carried through the entire room. He stopped directly beside Eliza, close enough for her to smell cold air and cedar smoke on his coat. For one strange second, neither of them spoke. Then Wade reached for her. His hand settled firmly against her shoulder. Every eye in the room widened. Clara actually laughed once under her breath, nervous and confused. "Wade," she said carefully, "what exactly is this?" He never looked away from Eliza. "That woman," he said quietly, "is already my wife." Silence crashed through the room. A glass slipped from someone's hand near the fireplace and shattered against the floor. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "Wife?" Clara stared at him as if she'd been slapped. "What did you say?" Wade finally looked toward the crowd. "I said," he repeated calmly, "Eliza Brooks is my wife." The room erupted into whispers. "Impossible. Who is she? Since when?" "He's lying." "What about Clara?" Eliza's heart hammered so hard it hurt. Wade's hand remained steady on her shoulder, like he expected her to stay standing, like he'd already decided she belonged beside him. Clara's voice cracked sharp through the noise. "You cannot be serious." Wade turned toward her slowly. "I've never been more serious in my life." And suddenly every person in that mansion was staring at Eliza Brooks like she had just set the whole West on fire. Nobody spoke. The piano player sat frozen with his hands above the keys. Somewhere near the dining room, a woman coughed into the silence. Eliza could hear her own heartbeat. Clara Granger stepped forward first. Her face had gone pale beneath the soft gold light. "You're lying." Wade barely looked at her. "Careful, Clara. You expect people to believe this?" Clara's voice cracked sharp enough to cut glass. "Her?" The word hung ugly in the air. Eliza felt Wade's hand tighten slightly against her shoulder. Not rough, just steady, like he already knew she was trying not to bolt for the door. Silas Granger appeared from the far side of the room then, slower than his daughter, older. Thick silver mustache, expensive black coat stretched across a heavy frame. Unlike Clara, he didn't look shocked. He looked dangerous. "Well," Silas said quietly, "that's an interesting announcement." Wade met his eyes. "It wasn't meant to be, and yet here we are." The room stayed painfully still. Eliza swallowed hard. She still had no idea why this was happening, only that she was trapped in the middle of something bigger than herself. Wade finally removed his hand from her shoulder. "Excuse us," he said calmly. Before anyone could stop him, he guided Eliza across the room toward a long hallway lined with oil paintings and hunting rifles. The whispers exploded behind them the second they disappeared from sight. Wade opened a dark wooden door and motioned her inside. The sty smelled like leather, smoke, and whiskey. Maps covered one wall. Papers lay scattered across a massive oak desk beside an untouched cup of black coffee gone cold hours ago. A fire cracked low in the stone hearth. Wade shut the door firmly behind them. Eliza spun around immediately. "What the hell was that?" He loosened the collar of his shirt slowly, like a man already tired of the night. "A solution. You called me your wife. I know. You don't even know me. I know enough." Snow rattled softly against the window panes. Eliza stared at him in disbelief. "You embarrassed that woman in front of half the territory. That woman planned to own my life. That still doesn't explain me." For the first time since she'd entered the mansion, Wade looked uncertain, not weak, just cornered. He walked toward the desk and opened a drawer. Papers slid softly beneath his hand. "My father owed Silas Granger a great deal of money," he said. "Land loans, railroad investments, cattle losses after the winter storms 3 years back." Eliza crossed her arms tightly. And before he died, he promised the debt would disappear if I married Clara." The room went quiet except for the fire. Eliza frowned slowly. "You're serious." Unfortunately, he pulled out a folded contract and tossed it onto the desk between them. She stepped closer carefully. Official stamps, bank seals. amounts so large her stomach tightened just reading them. If I refuse the marriage, Wade said, the bank takes Iron Mesa by spring. Eliza looked back up at him. You could pick any woman in Wyoming. No, his jaw hardened. I couldn't. Why not? Because every woman they introduced me to belonged to them already. The wind outside grew louder. Wade leaned both hands against the desk. Tonight was supposed to be the announcement. Silas planned the guest list himself. Ranch owners, investors, judges. He gave a dry laugh without humor. Witnesses. Eliza stared at the contract again, then at him. So what now? Wade held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said it plainly. I want you to marry me for 1 year. Eliza actually laughed once under her breath, not because it was funny, because it sounded insane. You've lost your mind. I'll pay you $30,000. That stopped her cold. $30,000. Enough to save the little house near Copper Creek. Enough for Daisy's doctor visits. Enough to stop choosing between medicine and coal every winter. Wade watched the realization hit her. You looked exhausted when you walked in tonight, he said quietly. People who aren't desperate don't look like that at 25. The words stung because they were true. Eliza looked away first. My sister's sick, she admitted carefully. I know. Her head snapped up. You know, I asked around after I saw you downstairs. Something about that should made her angry. Instead, it just made her tired. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere deep in the mountains. Snow had started falling hard now. Big white flakes slammed against the dark windows. Wade poured whiskey into a glass, but didn't drink it. 1 year, he said. You stay here. We make them believe the marriage is real. When the contract's clear, you leave with the money. And if I say no, then tomorrow morning, Silas announces my engagement to Clara in front of every newspaper west of Cheyenne. The fire popped sharply between them. Eliza thought about Daisy, coughing through the night beneath patched blankets. Thought about overdue medicine bills folded inside the kitchen drawer. Thought about how cold their house had felt that morning. You really would marry a stranger to save this ranch? Wade finally took a sip of whiskey. Yes, Eliza studied him quietly. There was no romance in his face, no softness, no charm, just exhaustion. The kind a person carried for years. Another long silence settled. Then Wade reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a plain gold ring. Not flashy, old, worn smooth around the edges. My mother's, he said. Eliza stared at it without touching it. You planned this? No. He looked toward the storm outside. But I've been waiting for something to break one way or another. Lightning flashed white across the study windows. The whole ranch seemed to shake beneath the storm. Finally, Eliza asked the question neither of them wanted answered. If I do this, what happens to me after the year ends? Wade looked at her carefully. You leave richer than you came. But somehow that answer didn't sound nearly as simple as he wanted it to. The fire cracked low in the study while snow battered the windows hard enough to rattle the glass. Eliza looked down at the gold ring still resting in Wade's palm. Outside that room, the party had already started talking. She could almost hear the rumors moving through the mansion walls like smoke. The poor saddle girl, the mystery wife, the cowboy who'd lost his senses. You really expect me to walk back out there and pretend this makes sense? She asked quietly. Wade slid the ring back into his pocket. No, I expect you to survive it. That answer sat strangely between them. Not romantic, not warm, honest. A clock ticked somewhere near the bookshelf. Finally, Eliza let out a slow breath. 1 year. 1 year. And after that, we go separate ways. Wade nodded once. You don't ask questions about where I go, she said. You don't control my sister. And you don't treat me like some decoration standing beside you. A faint shadow crossed his face at that last part. I don't keep decorations, he said. For some reason, that landed heavier than she expected. The storm worsened by midnight. Most of the guests had already rushed back into Copper Creek before the mountain roads disappeared beneath snow. The remaining carriages stood buried halfway to their wheels outside the mansion gates. Eliza signed the marriage papers at the corner of Wade's desk with stiff fingers, still cold from the ride into town earlier that evening. The ink trembled slightly beneath her hand. Wade signed after her. No grand speeches, no flowers, no music, just the scratching sound of pen tips and the distant howl of Wyoming wind. Ruthie Mae stood beside the fireplace, acting as witness, her gray hair pinned tightly beneath a dark bonnet. She watched both of them carefully without saying much. The town preacher smelled faintly of wet wool and tobacco smoke. "Well," he muttered awkwardly after folding the documents. "That's done then." Nobody smiled. A little after 1 in the morning, Eliza stepped outside beneath the covered porch while the papers dried inside. The cold hit instantly. Snow covered the ranch fences and the empty cattle pens below the hill. Lantern light glowed gold through the storm from the bunkhouse windows farther down near the barns. Iron Mesa Ranch looked enormous at night. Lonely too. The front door creaked open behind her. Wade stepped out carrying a heavy wool coat. "You'll freeze standing there." "I've survived worse." Still, he draped the coat carefully over her shoulders anyway. The fabric smelled like cedarwood, leather, and cold air. Eliza almost handed it back immediately. Almost. "You always this stubborn?" Wade asked. "You always marry strangers during blizzards?" For the first time all night, the corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. The moment disappeared fast. A wagon rolled through the ranch gate below them, carrying late supplies from town. One of the ranch hands shouted something toward the stable through the wind. Life kept moving, even when people's lives turned upside down. "You'll stay in the East Wing," Wade said after a while. "Room near the upstairs washroom. Ruthie Mae will help you settle in. And you?" "West Side. Separate rooms, separate lives." Eliza nodded slowly, though something about hearing it out loud made the arrangement suddenly feel more real. Not husband and wife. Just two exhausted people, standing inside a bargain, neither fully trusted. Back inside, Ruthie Mae guided Eliza upstairs, carrying a kerosene lamp. The hallway floors creaked softly beneath their boots. "You don't need to fear him," the older woman said quietly. Eliza glanced over. "I didn't say I did." "No." Ruthie Mae gave a knowing look. "But you're trying very hard not to." The bedroom was larger than the entire cabin. Eliza shared with Daisy. A real feather mattress, a porcelain wash basin, fresh quilts folded neatly at the foot of the bed. On the dresser sat a small tin warming plate with untouched coffee and butter biscuits someone had prepared hours earlier. Eliza stared at it all silently. "You should eat," Ruthie Mae said gently. Long nights feel longer on an empty stomach. After she left, the room became painfully quiet. Eliza removed her boots slowly beside the bed. Red Wyoming dust still clung stubbornly around the leather seams beneath melt-on snow. She thought about Daisy sleeping alone tonight. Thought about the overdue bill sitting at the doctor's office in Copper Creek. $30,000. Enough to change everything. Yet somehow, lying there beneath expensive blankets in a stranger's ranch house, she had never felt less certain about her future. Downstairs, a door shut heavily somewhere in the mansion. Then silence again, the kind that settles over lonely places buried deep beneath snow. Eliza stared at the ceiling a long time before finally closing her eyes. And across the hall, Wade Coulter sat awake beside the dying fire in his study, holding a marriage certificate in one hand and an untouched glass of whiskey in the other. Neither of them slept much before morning. The storm finally eased around dawn. By sunrise, Iron Mesa Ranch looked buried beneath white silence. Snow rested heavy across fence posts and wagon trails. Thin smoke curled from the bunkhouse chimneys, while stable hands shoveled paths through the drifts with bent iron scoops. Eliza woke to the sound of boots crunching outside her window. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the expensive wallpaper, the polished dresser, the folded wool blanket near the fireplace, and the ring sitting beside the wash basin. She stared at it a long time before slipping it onto her finger. Downstairs smelled like coffee and bacon grease. Ruthie Mae stood near the stove wearing a faded brown apron, pouring batter onto a cast-iron skillet. She glanced over once as Eliza entered. "You take sugar? Just coffee's fine." The older woman slid a warm mug toward her anyway. Real cream floated across the top. Eliza wrapped both hands around the cup, letting the heat settle into her fingers. The kitchen windows faced east toward the corrals. Cowboys moved through the snow carrying feed sacks over their shoulders, while horses snorted steam into the cold morning air. Nobody laughed loudly. Nobody smiled much either. One young ranch hand stepped inside to grab biscuits from the counter. He froze after noticing Eliza sitting there. His eyes dropped quickly toward the wedding ring, then toward Ruthie Mae. "Morning," he muttered awkwardly. Ruthie Mae handed him a plate. "Then stop standing there like you've seen a ghost." The boy disappeared fast. Eliza lowered her eyes toward her coffee again. By noon, the entire ranch knew. Not just about the marriage, about her, the new Mrs. Coulter. The whispers followed her everywhere, through the main hallway, across the stable yard, past the supply shed beside the water tower. Some men tipped their hats politely. Others stared too long. A few acted like she simply did not belong there at all. Wade remained busy most of the afternoon meeting with cattle foremen and checking storm damage near the north fencing line. Eliza barely saw him except once through the front window when he crossed the yard on horseback beneath a gray winter sky. He looked more comfortable out there than inside his own house. Toward evening, Clara Granger arrived. Her black carriage rolled hard through the front gate, wheels slicing through dirty snow. The ranch seemed to tense the moment she stepped down. Clara entered the house without removing her gloves. "You've embarrassed my father across 3 counties," she told Wade coldly, the second she saw him in the parlor. Eliza stood near the bookshelf, pretending to organize sewing supplies Ruthie Mae had given her earlier. Clara looked directly at the wedding ring on Eliza's hand, then smiled without warmth. "Well," she said softly, "I suppose temporary arrangements can still wear jewelry." Wade's jaw tightened. "That's enough, Clara." "No," Clara replied calmly. "What's enough is this performance." The room went still. Outside, wind rattled the windows again. Clara stepped closer toward Wade, lowering her voice. "You really think my father's going to let this stand?" Wade said nothing. That silence answered more than words could. Clara noticed it too. For the first time since arriving, her confidence cracked slightly around the edges. Then she turned toward Eliza. "You should know something before you settle into this fantasy." Her voice remained smooth and polished. "Men like Wade Coulter don't marry for love." Eliza met her gaze evenly. "Good thing I didn't ask for it then." A flicker crossed Wade's face. Tiny, gone fast. Clara laughed once under her breath and walked out before anyone answered. The front door slammed hard behind her. Night settled heavily over Iron Mesa after that. Later, while carrying folded laundry upstairs, Eliza passed the study and heard voices through the partly open door. Silas Granger, cold, sharp, controlled. "That girl is temporary," he said. "The ranch still belongs to me." Eliza stopped breathing for a second. Inside, the fire popped quite quietly. Wade spoke lower, harder to hear, but Silas continued. "You bought yourself time. Nothing more." Eliza stepped backward before the floorboards could betray her presence. The laundry basket suddenly felt heavier against her arms. Downstairs, the voices continued behind closed doors while snow drifted silently across the dark Wyoming fields outside. And for the first time, since putting on the wedding ring, Eliza realized something dangerous. This marriage might not save either of them after all. The days that followed settled into a strange kind of rhythm. Cold mornings, long silences, snow melting slowly from the hills beyond Iron Mesa Ranch. Every sunrise carried the smell of horses, wet leather, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Eliza kept busy because it was easier than thinking. She repaired split saddle straps in the tack room beside the barn, restitched winter coats for ranch hands, helped Ruthie Mae stretch flour through another hard week while cattle prices kept falling in Cheyenne. The cowboys watched her at first, not openly, but enough, especially when Wade walked past her, especially when he stopped to speak. One afternoon, a gelding near the South Corral threw a shoe and cut its leg against frozen rock. Two ranch hands struggled to calm the animal while snow whipped across the yard. Eliza stepped in without hesitation. "Stop pulling the reins," she snapped. "You're scaring him worse." The men froze. She moved slowly toward the horse, one hand low, voice soft. "It's all right now. Easy." The animal trembled beneath clouds of steam. Wade stood near the fence, watching silently, while Eliza wrapped the bleeding leg with strips torn from an old feed sack. The horse finally settled. One of the cowboys muttered under his breath, impressed despite himself. That evening, Wade left a new pair of leather gloves outside her bedroom door. No note, no explanation, just gloves lined with sheep wool for Wyoming winters. Eliza stared at them for a long time before bringing them inside. Little things began changing after that. The ranch hands stopped whispering quite so loudly. Someone fixed the loose step outside her cabin without being asked. Coffee was already waiting whenever she entered the kitchen before dawn. And Wade started smiling more, not often, but enough to notice. A few days later, he took her riding along the western ridge, where the snowfields opened wide beneath pale blue skies. Their horses moved slowly through knee-high drifts while distant mountains sat sharp against the horizon. "You ride decent," Wade admitted. "That your version of kindness? That was me being generous." She laughed quietly for the first time since arriving at Iron Mesa. The sound surprised both of them. By late afternoon, wind rolled hard across the valley. A storm moved in fast. They barely reached an abandoned line cabin before the snow hit. Inside smelled like cedar smoke and old lantern oil. Wade lit a fire while Eliza rubbed warmth back into her frozen fingers beside the stove. Outside, the storm buried the world. Inside, silence settled differently than before. Not awkward, just close. Wade removed his coat and draped it over the back of her chair without looking directly at her. "You always try fixing things alone?" she asked softly. "Usually. That working out for you?" One corner of his mouth lifted faintly. "Not lately." The fire cracked between them. Snow tapped against the windows. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Wade reached into his saddlebag and placed something gently onto the table. Eliza blinked. Her sewing machine handle, the broken brass piece she'd been trying to repair for weeks. "You fixed it?" "You looked ready to throw the whole machine through a wall." She stared down at the polished metal piece in silence. Nobody had fixed something for her in a very long time. Later that night, Daisy's coughing fit worsened back at the ranch. Wade rode through the storm alone to fetch the doctor from Copper Creek. By the time he returned near dawn, snow covered his shoulders and ice clung to his gloves. Eliza met him near the stairs while the doctor checked Daisy upstairs. "You could've waited until morning," she whispered. Wade pulled off his hat slowly. She couldn't. Their eyes met. Too long, too quietly. Something shifted there neither of them wanted to name. That evening, while standing beside the stable fence watching snow fall over the valley, Wade finally spoke the rule aloud. No falling in love. Eliza kept her eyes on the distant hills. Wasn't planning to. But neither one sounded fully convincing anymore. And somewhere beyond the frozen fields of Iron Mesa Ranch, trouble was already moving closer. Maybe that's the part that stays with you after a story like this. Not the money, not the land, not even the fight over the ranch. Maybe it's the quiet things. A man riding through a blizzard because a little girl couldn't breathe. A woman who kept showing up for people even after life gave her every reason to stop trusting anyone. Two lonely souls sitting beside the same fire, pretending their hearts were still safe. And if you've ever loved someone carefully, if you've ever been afraid to need another person because losing them might break what's left of you, then you probably understand Wade and Eliza more than you think. Out on the frontier, people survived winter by depending on each other. That was true then, and maybe it still is now. Sometimes love doesn't arrive gently. Sometimes it walks in wearing muddy boots, carrying old scars, and asking for one last chance to be believed. And sometimes the strongest homes are built by two people who never expected to be chosen at all. If this story touched something in you, tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you'd like, stay a while longer on this trail with us. There are still more stories waiting beyond the campfire. Stories about second chances, hidden grief, quiet courage, and the kind of love that keeps people warm through the coldest nights in the West.